Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Masters of the Order. You know, on this show, most of us dream of visiting that galaxy far, far away. Well, actually, there has been people that have actually been there. So we are here talking to those people. My guest on this episode is a current podcaster and co-host of Fat Man Beyond. He has also been a writer for TV shows such as Castle Rock, Treadstone, and Masters of the Universe Revelation, which I love, by the way. Recently, he wrote for a story in the Darth Vader comic, Black, White, and Red. But currently, right now, on your comic book shelves, he is writing the new series of Mace Windu, which is garnered a lot of discussion because there's a lot of Mace Windu theories going on out there, which I can't wait to dive into this. So welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me, Marc Bernardin. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
I am doing good. Thanks for joining me. I know I'm on the East Coast. You're on the West Coast, so always tough with lining up these 3-hour discussions, but I really appreciate it.
No worries.
So let's dive in. You know, this show, I try to get into, you know, obviously talking about Star Wars, the work that you've done with Star Wars recently. But I also want to get into letting our listeners know and everything about you. So let's go all the way back to where did Marc grow up? What did you get into while you were growing up?
I grew up in New York. I grew up born in the Bronx. Lived there until I was about 10. Family moved to Long Island, South Shore of Long Island, town called Baldwin. And then I moved to Queens when I became a big boy and had my own apartment, and then, got married, moved to New Jersey, and then ended up here in LA. But, as a kid, it was not nearly as acceptable to be a public nerd.
Right.
Born in the early 70s, growing up in the late 70s and the 80s, like there was no. It wasn't until Batman came out, the movie, that you could wear like a Batman T-shirt and not get beat up. So we nerds had to be a little bit more silent about it. We had to be a little bit quiet about it. And there were these moments when it was cool, and Star Wars were, at the very least 3 of those giant moments, because it was the first time where everybody was a nerd. Like a movie doesn't become as big a hit as Star Wars and Empire and Jedi did unless everybody watches them. And so everybody knew who Luke Skywalker was. I mean, Mark Hamill's on The Tonight Show. They're doing like Muppet episodes and stuff. Like it's
Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, like it was massive. And so you could then kind of be an out Star Wars fan, an out nerd. Like you could carry your little cheesy, awful plastic lightsaber, and then like take it out of your house. You could wear a T-shirt and it'd be cool. You could have Yoda underoos and nobody would make fun of you when you went to gym class.
Yeah.
But even then it was, kind of on the DL, kind of, and especially if you were a first run Star Wars person, there was no real way to engage with Star Wars until you got another movie. Like it was 3 years between movies.
That's right.
And so in that time, like, we had the toys we could play with, and we had, the apparel and the sheets. I had a full Star Wars bedding set where I had the pillowcases and the drapes and all of it.
Yeah.
You maybe had an awful TV special. Maybe there was a crappy cartoon. There was a tiny handful of novels. But on the large part, like you were just kind of inventing the world as you went, because you and your buddies would play with your figures, and you would be Han Solo and you'd be Luke Skywalker, and then you would just do stuff. And so it was a matter of being able to sustain the faith, right? Could you still be a fan in the absence of new material, And then after Jedi, could you still be a fan for 15 years before the whiff of Phantom Menace is coming down the pike?
That's right.
And I feel like it tested quite a few Star Wars fans, but, absence does make the heart grow fonder.
Well, that's true. That's true. What about comics? Were you in the comics when you were young too?
I didn't, by like 12 or 13, I think was my first real engaging with comics. Like my dad, who was not a comics fan, except like he's from Haiti. And so there was a decent number of a decent amount of like crossover between like French comics, which were still big and real and international and popular.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't quite the stigma about comics with my dad because he kind of grew up reading like Asterisk and whatever. So he tried a couple of times. My mom also be in like the supermarket, and she's like, "Well, here's a collector's pack of DC books. It's got Superman and Wonder Woman in it. Why don't you like this? You should like this." And it didn't click until the Secret Wars. The Secret Wars was my entry into comics proper, into superhero comics proper.
Yeah,
And
interesting.
which is what it was designed to do. It was designed to be like this 12 issue, like, hey, our sales are flagging. How do we get new people in? Let's just give them everything all at once. Here's every character we have, all in the same book. And it did its job. And I became like a Marvel fan and a Spider-Man fan and an X-Men fan. And then around 86 is kind of when, the ramp up to Batman started to begin, but also you get Watchmen, you get the Dark Knight Returns.
Yep.
That was a really seminal year for me in the shifting over, or at least exposing myself to DC books, which is a weird turn of phrase to talk about comic book stores exposing oneself.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
But and then like suddenly there's the indie movement beginning to start, and and there's like Concrete, and there's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and there's like this kind of the awesomeness, like the Tick, the New England Press stuff, like, and so that was it for me. Like I kind of went into the late 80s, early 90s as a comic book fan, and then did the thing that one does when they get to like college. Is stop reading comic books.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I was a late bloomer in comics, to be honest. I actually didn't get into it until the New 52.
Again, something designed to bring in new readers, which is like, hey, we gotta open the doors again.
Exactly right. But of course, I've gone back and tried to catch up on Crisis on Infinite Earths, and I'm definitely more of a DC guy, but understand that I had friends that love Spider-Man. I feel like Spider-Man was the biggest thing growing up.
Yeah, there was something, especially as an East Coast kid, there was something incredibly attractive about reading a Marvel comic book and then being able to visit the place that's in the book. It's like, they're going through Grand Central Station on their way up to Gray Malkin Lane where the X-Men mansion is, and Spider-Man lives in Queens, and like the Sanctum Sanctorum is in the Greenwich Village. Like, I know where Greenwich Village is. Like, wait. Daredevil's from Hell's Kitchen, I know where that is too.
Yeah.
Whereas like Metropolis and Gotham and Star City and like these were like, we kind of knew what they were, but they weren't the thing.
That's right. No, that's true. That's a good way of looking at it. That's a very good way. So at what point in this journey did you decide I want to be a writer or I want to be a journalist, or how did you get there?
Well, I think the first creative impulse I had was to make comic books. And then I realized that I couldn't draw, which then seemed to make making comic books just, 1,000 light years away. But then I decided I want to go into film. I was like, I want to be a filmmaker. Like, Star Wars was the first movie I ever saw in a theater that I have like real memories for. Yeah. Which then led to going to see like Flash Gordon and E.T. and Raiders and like, and especially like the George Lucas, Steven Spielberg kind of like, we're making pulp on a grand scale because we kind of love this stuff, and we grew up with this stuff too, and now we're making it. And it was like the early 90s where I was when I went into college. I went to St. John's University in Queens, and and I was like, and I couldn't get into NYU. I wanted to go to NYU Film School because I kind of wanted to be like Spike Lee. Like some mixture of Spike Lee and Steven Spielberg was the dream.
Okay.
And I feel like Jordan Peele had the same dream at some point, and he's the guy who got to make that come true.
Yeah.
But so I wanted to go into film. I was like, I can't draw. I think I can write, but if there's a camera that I don't have to draw, I can just shoot things. And and I made like 3 or 4 short films in college that were awful because I was the only one who cared about it. It was my thing, and everybody else was doing me favors, and favors are not the best way to elicit the best work.
That's right.
But I discovered in that process that like everything was fine on the page, Like it's when I had to realize it that it got to be an issue. So what if I just focus on what I can control, which was what's on the page? Like I think I'm gonna be a writer. That's what I'm gonna do. And then I
Wow.
took an internship at a to get my last 3 credits to graduate at a science fiction magazine called Starlog, which doesn't exist anymore. Um, but and that was my first foray into journalism, which was I don't know what this is. I read magazines. I read a lot of things because
Yeah.
it was way more attractive to read then because you know for all the reasons. Nobody had a
Right.
phone in their pockets.
Not
Um,
yet.
Not yet. And so like that, I was at Starlog for like 3 years and got to work and very much learn how to do almost everything in magazines at the time because the editorial staff was like 3 people deep. So we were editing stories and writing stories and rewriting stories
Oh
and
wow.
working with the art department to lay things out and choosing photos and talking to publicists and getting access and all that stuff. And so from there I went to Entertainment Weekly, where I was
Yep.
for about
Right.
13 years, I think.
Right.
But that whole time, still like remembering like the writing is cool and I'm learning so much more by working at a place with everybody. Like EW was stocked to the gills with nerds, but everybody
Mm.
was a nerd for something else. Like there was your Broadway musical nerd, there was your soap opera nerd, your prog rock
Right.
nerd. I was the comic book nerd, but over there was like an EC comics nerd and like and I was in the film department, so I worked with film nerds and getting to like talk to film critics and writers and
Right.
editors and like every week just what did we see this week? What was good? What was bad? Like working with film critics to help them kind of hone their takes on things
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
to even more than hone, just make them clear. The clarity of
Mm.
communication is what the job was. And so learning how to talk about film, learning how to sort of analyze film as both a critic and in my back brain kind of as a writer because that's
Yes.
the other thing that I wanted to do. And it was at a time when you could on like VHS or Laserdisc or DVD like get access to the world's great cinema and you could find the script for those things. Like I used to go down to Washington Square Park outside NYU. There'd always be like a bunch of guys selling scripts, like a binder full of scripts for like $10 a pop. And so I'd buy all the movies that I loved on script and then rent all the movies that I loved and then watch them side by side. And like, all right, so this is what's in the
Wow.
script, and then this is what's on the
Wow.
screen. So this equals that. That's how they got this to happen. And like, yes, direction and acting and performance and all that stuff, but here's what the blueprint was, and here's what the
Yeah.
outcome was. And that's kind of how I taught myself how to write, especially, moving entertainment, especially movies or TV.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
That's
that was the
great.
path into journalism. Journalism was like a weird side offshoot that I got happily lost in for almost 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. But obviously, you found your way out of that into writing. What was your first gig? First writing gig into the business?
The first comic book gig, it was comics first.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Yes, that's right. Yep.
because I was editing, I was covering comics for Entertainment Weekly, and I'd go to like Comic Con and New York Comic Con and whatever, and
Yes.
I'd meet people, editors and publishers, and it's like, oh, hey, you can write, like, and you can also write to a deadline, which is also awesome. Do you ever think about comics? And I'd say, well, since I was 12. You want to pitch something? And I'd say yes. And so the first thing that somebody said yes to was a book called Monster Attack Network that I co-wrote
Mm-hmm.
with Adam Freeman, who both of us know,
Right.
um, and was published by a Bay Area publisher called AIT Planet Lar. And it was just like it was a big kaiju comedy workplace action movie thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's hard, man. Writing comics is hard. It's never not hard.
Yeah.
It's never not hard because like comics is this weird bastard form where it's both like you're writing dialogue, so it's like a bit playwriting or screenwriting. You're
Right.
setting the stage for where the action is taking place, which has a lot of the screenwriting stuff to it. Um, but you're choosing the shots. Like if you're writing, quote unquote full script, and like page one, panel one, this is what you see. This is who says what. Page one, panel two. Like, and suddenly I'm like, it's a little bit cinematography, it's a little bit
Yeah. You're visually
storyboarding.
directing almost, right?
You're
Yeah.
visually directing. Like this is what's important in the scene. This is what we have to show, and then figuring out how to show that in a still image and not a moving image, where it's just a snapshot.
Right.
And then it's being mindful of how much dialogue is on a page or on a balloon because you can't crowd out the art. We came for the art, So don't cover the art with words because you feel like you want to say a lot. So it was just learning all of these disciplines kind of all at once, and it's really hard. It eventually becomes a little bit second nature, and eventually becomes
Right.
rhythmic in a way. But at first, man, it'll crack your skull open.
Do you have when you're doing that, the artist that is eventually going to draw, ink, pencil, all that stuff, color, are they? Do they come back to you and say, "I don't think that'll work," or it doesn't
Sometimes,
fit like that? Or
sometimes,
okay,
especially early on, when I would not be mindful of those rules, where it's like, hey, he cannot cross the room and open a door. Can't do that in one panel. Which is the more important one? Or I'm just going to choose what's the most important one.
right, right, right.
And I would always
Okay,
be candid, and I still am, which is like, hey, here's a script. Here's what I think will work. But if you can come up with a better way to do this, or if something isn't working for you, let's talk about it. I am not
hmm
precious in any way, except for the things that I am precious about. But even still, like if it's not working, let's fix it.
yeah,
And at
yeah,
this point, if it's not working, it's my fault. So let's get under the hood and see how we can make it all better.
right. What about TV?
TV came after comics. Like it was a couple of comic books. The Monster Tag Network came out. The Highwaymen came out for Wildstorm. And then Adam and I did a book called Genius for Top Cow.
hmm
And an agent kind of caught wind of it. Like an agent at the time, he was at William Morris, I think, WME. He was like, "Hey, I like this book. What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I says, "Well, I think I want to write TV." He says, "Okay. Um, well, write me a pilot for something, and then come out to LA for meetings, and we'll see if we can find you a job on a TV show." And I said, "Great," which is what I did.
Nice.
I wrote a pilot, which isn't good. Like looking back on it today, like there's some pleasures to be found in it, but it's not great. But I came out for meetings, and I'm pretty good in a room. And then I got the job offer to go on Alphas. Alphas was the first job, the Sci-Fi Channel show
Right.
back in like 2009. I want to say it was 2009,
hmm
2010, 2010, 2011, which was amazing, which was phenomenal. Like getting
Right.
to be in a room with professionals who do this for a living, and getting to see, the rigorous nature with which every story is broken, with which every element is sort of talked about and debated and finalized, and getting to learn how to
Yeah.
write for actors, who are going to be doing the work.
Right.
It was incredibly educational, and so illuminating in every way, because I've been watching this stuff as a passive viewer for most
hmm
of my life, and now suddenly it's, oh, this is how you make the sausage, because I love the sausage, but now we're making the
Yes.
sausage. All right, this is cool. But yeah, that was the first gig.
And do you think your work, like at EW, as far as like a critic, how much is that? Does that can't not do nothing but help? I guess the way you shape writing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
journalism helped in a lot of ways. It helped in speed,
Yeah.
like the capacity to be able to turn around a script
Script. Yep.
relatively quickly, the ability to hit a deadline. Like if you give me a deadline, I'll hit your deadline.
Right.
If you don't give me a deadline, I will take forever. But if there's a deadline, I will find a way to ram into it. Um,
Yeah.
I'm good at interfacing with other people. Like
hmm
journalism, a lot of it is not just like grinding out on any particular piece, but it's now I have to talk to the editor of the piece. I got to talk to the writer. I got to talk to the layout designer. I got to talk to research department, copy. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's all about working with a lot of people to achieve a sort of singular piece of work, which is a lot like TV. You're
hmm
working
hmm
with even within the writer's room, but even when you get to production, like you're interfacing with every department, trying to
Right.
communicate what these 45 minutes are supposed to be. And
Right.
so, and also like I came to TV as a grown up. I was not 22 years old, 23 years old when I showed
Mm-hmm.
up in TV. I got my first like alphas. I was 40, I think, maybe
Mm-hmm.
41 years old. And so like I'd had a life already, like I had a family
Right.
already, like I any weird immaturities had been beaten out of me by previous employers. So I
Yeah.
showed up ready to work. Like, what do you need? But I'm also
Yeah.
going to go home
Yeah.
every day and play with my children and hang out with my wife.
Yeah.
And so I think, journalism did, it armed me in a really good stead to be able to do some of that work, and also clarity. If I
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
if I have 1,000 words to convince you to go see a movie, then I can't waste any of those 1,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
So if
Mm-hmm.
I've only got 45 pages to tell you a story, then each one of those pages needs to do something. Every scene needs to do something. Every line of
Right.
dialogue needs to have a function, not just it sounds cool. Cool's
Y-
great, but what's it doing?
Yes. Yeah. Because I've noticed that about, because I've listened to you guys on Fat Man for a while, and that's the one thing I've come to definitely appreciate with you, because I think most people, I think, obviously watch as a fan, and they don't really know everything that goes into creating a TV show or creating a movie, and all the back and forth, all the research, like you just said. But and when you're in that business and you're a journalist and a critic and stuff like that, you find things in your reviews that a lot of people I don't think find, right. So it's very thorough, and very appreciative. I think there's a big good dialogue there that you and like Kevin have obviously on the show, but it's very enticing, or very enlightening for me, because it's a lot of things you see that a lot of people don't see. I think it's because of that history that you have.
Yeah, and it again is just being like my training was taking things apart and putting them back together.
Right.
Like that's
Yeah.
my dad used to have a mechanic who I would ask him, it's like, hey, can you teach me how to do this? It's like, yeah, go take apart that engine and put it back together again. I was like, but Bruce, that
Yes.
doesn't help me. It's like, tell me how to do the thing. It's like, well, that's how you do the thing. You see all the pieces, you see what each piece does, and then
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
find a way to slot them back together again. If you have a couple screws left over, that's fine. But and
Right.
so that's kind of how that was my self-taught method of film school, which is all right, take it
Yes.
apart and see what is this doing, what is that doing, and then coming to stuff today, like my wife kind of does not like watching movies with me because she knows what my brain is doing, whether I want it to be doing it or not.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
well, what did you think? I was like, well, listen, like it's these things work fine, and for what it is, it's really good. But here's two or three things that like didn't quite hit for me. I was like, yeah,
That's
I know.
exactly. That's exactly you. That's exactly it. All right. You mentioned Star Wars already a little bit, but seeing the first movie, and so you did see A New Hope in the theaters.
Yeah, no, I was a first run kid.
Yeah, that's
At
great.
how old was I must have been six or seven.
Six.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. That is incredible. So, what was it? Obviously, everybody knows that it was a one of a kind film at the time. The effects were incredible at the time, things like that. What it is about to you? What was it about that movie that kind of drew you in and made it such a great watch?
I mean, it's weird because I don't think I had a ton to compare it with, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
if you were a 15-year-old, you'd have been like, well, all right, it's 2001 is this, or Planet of the Apes is
Right.
that, and this is what Star Wars did better than either of them, or didn't, or whatever. But it for me was a very foundational thing, which is like, oh, this is what movies are. And it's so
Mm-hmm.
different from what TV was at the time. And I'm sure I was watching cartoons and whatever soap operas that was on, but there's nothing like it. You couldn't encounter anything that felt like Star Wars.
Right.
Um, but I also think that like it is such pure mythic storytelling, right? It is very good and evil to the point where the evil guy's wearing a black shell and the good guy's wearing like white togs, and it's and the other thing that I remember, loving about it was that it implied a story that came before without telling you too much about it. But this is
Right.
not the only one of these stories. This is a slice in what had been an ongoing narrative. When Ben
Yes.
starts talking about the Clone Wars and your father was the best star pilot in the galaxy. It's like, oh wait, stuff happened before this?
Boy. Yeah.
That's cool.
That's
It has a
true.
history. Everything had a history. Every
Mm-hmm.
ship had weight. It was like beat up. Like, Ben is an old ass man.
Yeah.
Like it's everything just felt lived in a way that most TV that I was watching didn't. Um, And yeah, like it's stirring, like even for a kid, to get to the finale of Star Wars, sorry, A New Hope, and it just suddenly you're feeling a thing you've never felt before. You're like, wait, I'm tense, I'm on edge. Are they gonna do it? Are they gonna win? I'm not sure. Like, and how are they gonna win? And the good guy's gonna be like, the construction of that finale is built so that you are as viscerally bonded to that story as humanly possible. And so when it happens, when they blow up the Death Star, when Luke and Han, and Wedge fly out, free and clear, like suddenly there's a release the likes of which you'd never encountered before.
Yeah.
And so it becomes this weird dopamine high you keep trying to chase. So just give me that feeling again. Give me that feeling like I felt at the end of A New Hope. But I've always just carried it with me, that the feeling of just like, look how big everything is. Look how fast everything is. Look how wide the screens are. Like when we're looking at Tatooine, like the horizon could go on forever. There's something very romantic about that movie.
Yes.
And so all that has kind of stuck with me. All that kind of like, and I will freely admit that I think Empire is a better movie, but A New Hope is still my favorite. Because of just the things that it does, especially in the last half of that movie, are it's magic. It's magic.
And it has stand the test of time, I feel like, too. Even my kids love it.
Yeah. I mean, it's also a wonky as hell movie. Like, I remember, showing it to my son for the first time, and he did not quite get into it. And I started to think about it. I was like, well, yeah, because Luke Skywalker didn't show up for like the first 20 minutes of this movie. Your hero is not on the stage until like, all right, we got to do Darth, and we got to do this, and we got to do the droids, and the droids get lost, and they get captured, and then we're in the belly of the thing, and then like it's a banana structure for a movie,
Yes.
And it was very avant-garde. It was very like indie focused. It was very much like, I just want to live through the eyes of these droids.
That's right.
In a way you could not get away with doing today. You could not introduce your protagonist at the jump of your show or movie or whatever. Like John Wick needs to be in the beginning of John Wick.
True.
Yeah.
I have daughters, and I think my daughters obviously right away gravitated towards characters, right? So, my oldest, huge Leia fan because of that movie. Mm-hmm. My youngest, though, huge Chewbacca fan because of that movie.
I mean, it's hard to not love Chewbacca.
It is, yeah.
That's
you can't see it, but there's that table over there has the Lego Chewbacca that she's building, right now. So
excellent.
Anyway, so did you, as you got into TV writing and comics, I mean, did you have an aspiration to ever get into doing that for Star Wars? Was that one of the goals?
I'm not going to say it was a goal, but there's always a part of you that wants to do the thing you loved as a kid. That wants to kind of play in those spaces.
Right.
For some people that becomes a lifelong mission or a quest or whatever. Like, I know people who've wanted to write Spider-Man their whole lives and got to write Spider-Man, and like, I'm happy. I will write Spider-Man for the rest of my life and be totally fine with it. And they're great at it, and as well they should keep writing Spider-Man. I always kind of wanted to just like dip a toe. Like, I didn't want to be like an architect of it. I didn't want to be like, I didn't want it to become the entirety of my identity. But like, you know what? To get to write like a little bit of Star Wars would be fun. Like I still want to, and it's the dumbest little dream, but I still want to see my name in that like Lucasfilm blue on a screen.
Yes.
Not there yet, but that's still, it's the little dumb things, man.
It's coming. It's coming.
The Lucasfilm blue would be the like, you know what? It's game over, man. We did it. I'm gonna go open a farm somewhere.
That is awesome. So with Darth Vader, how did that come about? Was that since that was your first dip into it? How did that? It
was my first dip. I had done a short story for another anthology called American Kaiju. It was part of this like big King in Black Venom crossover thing, and they just wanted to like, hey, do you have a story for American Kaiju? I was like, what's American Kaiju? Like, well, it's this like super gung ho army guy who willingly gets subjected to like trying. It's the serum they were trying to replicate the Captain America serum, and it goes horribly wrong and turns him
Oh,
into like a big Godzilla with a flag on his chest. It was like, all right, I guess I could write 12 pages of inane, ridiculous kaiju action. Sure. Um, Went well, I think. The process was smooth enough, and that same editor was also in the Star Wars group, and he was like, "Hey, do you have like a Darth Vader story you need? You want to pitch us a couple of Darth Vader springboards to see if anything one of these clicks?" I was like, "Yeah, all right, sure, Darth Vader, I could do that." And sent
yeah.
them 3 or 4 little ideas of like 1 or 2 sentences. It wasn't deep. It was just like, "Do we think that this could be a thing?" And they picked one. They picked the one that ended up being diplomatic impunity. And
Yes.
it was a blast, man. I mean, Vader's fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Vader's fun. It was, but it was also like my first time really. Like I've worked on creator-owned characters. I've worked in company-owned characters. I've played with toys that don't belong to me
Right.
before. Most of TV is playing with toys that don't belong to you.
Right.
But Darth Vader was the first time that like the people for whom it belongs had things to say, you know. And
Yeah.
so it was always interesting when there would be like a note from Lucasfilm because it was never restrictive. They would never say you can't do that. They would say this doesn't work like this.
Oh, right.
Um, like I had this gag in the book where I wanted some sniper is shooting at Vader, and I wanted him to catch the bolt in midair and then rotate it backwards, like he'd spin it on his hand like it was a turntable, and then
Oh,
release it back to the guy who shot at him. And they're like, Vader can't do that. I was like, what do you mean Vader can't do that?
what?
I was like, is like, yeah, Vader can't like catch and release a blaster shot. Like, but Kylo Ren can do that. So, well, Kylo Ren has more control than Vader does. Vader has power, but
Wow. Okay.
Kylo was better trained. Like his master was Luke Skywalker.
Well, that's
Vader
true.
didn't quite have, like he was trained as a Jedi, but his training was never completed.
Right.
And then he lost his mind and went kind of nutso. They're like, yeah, he doesn't. That's not his skill set. It's like, oh, okay, I can make
Wow.
that work. But it was just like those little
Yeah.
things that only Lucasfilm, the story group, would know. And none of it made the story worse for it. It just made it
Hmm.
different, and not different
Right.
bad, but just different. And the
Yes.
main thrust of the story was kind of mine to play with. Um, and I feel like the Vader experience went well enough for all parties concerned, both for me and for Lucasfilm and for the editors, where they're like, "Hey, we got this Mace Windu thing. Do you want to do
Yeah.
Mace? Do you want to do a Mace miniseries?" And I said, "Well, sure. Here's a couple. Again, here's 3 or 4 ideas. And at the top of the list was, can I do Midnight Run, but with Mace Windu?" And they were like, "We see no
Wow.
reason why not." Like, okay, so it's gonna be a road thing. He's gonna
Okay.
have a traveling buddy who does not want to be there, and there's a MacGuffin that everybody's after that they have,
Hmm.
but it's more about Mace revealing. And it was be a young Mace. So it's like, can we do like Mace Year One? They're like, we're not doing Mace Year One, but we can do early Mace. We can do pre sort of Jedi Council Mace. We can do just like
Yes.
roving agent of the Jedi Order Mace Windu. I was like, this is cool. He's like James Bond. Can it also be James Bond? I'm like, yeah, I guess it could be James Bond. And so it
Okay.
literally, that first issue begins like a James Bond movie. It begins in the
That's
middle of
right.
an action sequence,
Yep.
which is, super cool. He shows off his powers. He does some neato aquatic boat stuff. Then he goes
Hmm.
back to the Jedi Temple, meets with M, in this case, Y, Yoda, who gives him his new mission,
That's
goes and
right.
then meets with like Q, the quartermaster, who explains all the things. And
That's
then he
right.
gets in his ship and he goes off. It's like, it's a Bond thing. Great.
Wow, that is a Bond thing.
And I was like, it's a perfect formula for the
That's
way to begin
great.
this.
Yeah,
Um,
that is fantastic.
which is
Wow.
another thing that I learned to do in writing TV, which is the shortcuts of communicating sort of tone and intent by using other reference points. It feels a bit
Right.
it might feel like cheating, but it's like, oh, it's James Bond meets Midnight Run, and like, oh, I get what that is.
Yeah.
I understand exactly
Absolutely.
what that is. Not the
Absolutely.
specifics of it, but just the tone of it, the vibe of it. Like, oh, all right, okay, yeah, sure, that sounds like fun.
Yeah. That's very interesting. So on the writing side, when you're working with Lucasfilm, is there something you could let us know behind the scenes that maybe we wouldn't know on the process at all, that was a little different for you at all? Was there anything like that?
No, I mean, again, it is still these are their toys.
Yeah.
And they're protective of them, but not restrictive in the way they allow you to play with them, because they want you to play. They want you to have fun.
Yeah.
And so it would always just be a matter of like, does this do this or does this not do that? Well, if you're going to use a kind of ship like this, maybe it should be this ship. If you're going to do X, it might be better if it's Y.
Right.
They were always incredibly collaborative, which was nice. Like until you bumped up against a wall where they're like, nope, we're not going to explain the purple lightsaber. Like, that's not for you to do.
Well, okay. Okay.
They were very specific. We don't want any firsts, and we don't want any lasts. We can have early and we can have late, but we're not going to, we're not aiming to create new canon here. We're aiming to play within what already exists as canon. And if, like they allowed me to create some characters, which is super fun. Like I got to create a big bad guy. I got to create a couple of incidental characters as we go. And that's a hoot. And got to talk a little bit about, and whenever I'm writing a thing, it has to be about something. It can't just be like, let's just have fun. This will be a cool romp or whatever. Like if you can, let's say a thing about a thing while we're doing that, And so for Mace, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, the responsibility that a person has to the place they come from. I wanted to talk a little bit about, the agency that somebody has as a Jedi. Like, what can you do? What can't you do? What are you allowed to do? Not so much emotionally, because I think that's ground that's been trodden quite a bit. The weird Jedi insistence on cutting off emotion, which clearly can't have any adverse repercussions. Everything is going swimmingly. Who needs to have the complete, collection of human emotions? But it was just getting to examine from an outsider's perspective what the Jedi must look like. And so having a character who's not a Jedi, have a character who never drank the sort of fruit punch of the Jedi Order, being able to question Mace a little bit as to what he's doing and why. I thought that was really, really important, and then to find a character who could kind of go toe to toe with Mace. Even a brilliant young, Jedi like Mace needed a challenge. And so Lucasfilm was gracious enough to let me kind of play in that end of the pool a little bit. And it was fun. It's fun.
So that's interesting to know. Is the series, are you done writing the series, or is it kind of ongoing? Oh, it's already done. Okay.
It's 4 issues. I think I've seen all of the art.
Yeah.
For everything. I haven't seen colors yet on the last couple, but yeah, my work on Mace is now just like, hey, should that be blue or red? like right. Oh, hey, there's one too many words in here. Like it's like one last chance to kind of rewrite the dialogue that I always overwrite, and then once it gets to the lettering phase, I just start pulling things out. It's like, we don't need that. We don't need that. We don't need that. Like, let the art sing for itself. The art's really great. Let's let that do its job. I tend to overwrite and then be surprised by the artist who does like what they're paid to do by be awesome. And then say, I didn't need those words. Too many words.
Right. Yeah. So give us a little sense of the timeline. Like, I know you like deadlines. Did they give you deadlines? When did you get commissioned to do this and then finish? How long of a time was that?
I think I was commissioned. Yeah, I think it was like February of last year.
Oh, okay.
Were the first conversations. And then the green light was in like March or April. Mm-hmm. And then, this like taking this on coincided with the Writers Guild strike.
Right.
Which, did make it attractive to be like, hey, listen, there's money coming in. I'm not just spending money by not working, by being on the picket line. Like I can write
That's
comic
true.
books. It's not covered by the guild. I'm not crossing any
Hmm.
picket lines. I'm not scabbing for anybody. So it did slot in very nicely into that, like,
Gotcha. Yeah.
May, June, July is kind of when I ended up doing most of the work. May, June, July, and I think August. So and yeah, it went smoothly. It took me, because there was not a gun to my head deadline that
Yeah.
was ridiculous. But like, if you can give us a script every 3 weeks, every month, then we're fine. And it ended up being about that,
Oh,
because like
nice.
I can
Okay.
write a script in a week. I've written a script in a day. It is not ideal. It's not good for anybody's health.
Right.
I've done it
Yeah.
and I can do it, but I prefer not to. And so,
Yeah.
um,
I
so
see.
3 weeks was a good stretch to write 20 pages of comic book, and then do other stuff on top of it.
Yeah. Right. That's good to know. Now, going back real quick to Vader, you know, with Darth Vader, obviously growing up, both of us around the same age, we're around the same age,
Hmm.
you know, all we had for a long time was the first three movies, right? And not, like you said, there was that history, but not knowing that history really until we got the prequels. And then, of course,
Hmm.
now we got the Clone Wars that kind of gave us more of Anakin and that journey. When you dove into the Vader and you were thinking about stories of that, how much of that history did that contribute to, your viewpoint of Vader, or did you just rely on what you knew about him from the originals?
I think part of the function of the story was, um, a young Imperial officer who's heard, because I can't imagine that everybody in the Empire has ever met Vader, but
Right.
everybody knows about Vader. You know,
Yes.
like it's one of my favorite moment in all of Jedi is when Luke Skywalker walks into the planning room as they're planning the Endor thing, and like, here's the dude who like blew up the Death Star, faced Darth Vader, walked away, and now he's here. And that feeling of like the young ensign in the corner, the young like lieutenant who like just got his wings to fly an X-wing, is in the room with Luke freaking Skywalker. Like,
Skywalker.
the
Yes,
fanboy must be huge.
that's
And
true.
so that idea that the legend of Vader precedes him, and that there's people who've like been talking up Vader, and like, man, I did a quick rotation on the executor, and I saw him walk down the hallway, and the wall shook when he passed by, or whatever that was. Like, I wanted the story to be from the perspective of somebody who's heard about Vader but never met him, but now suddenly gets a firsthand sort of audience
Yes.
and experience with Vader. So it was less about the history of Darth Vader or Anakin Skywalker, but more the perception of him from the rank and file in the Empire. And
Yeah.
then what that's like to be like, hey man, I'm really good at karaoke, and suddenly Michael Jackson picks you out of a lineup and it's like, come and do background. Like, suddenly you're with the presence of,
That's
for
right.
lack of a better word, a god,
Hmm.
um, who can do incredible things and is incredibly vile and evil. And like, I'm not evil. I just get a paycheck for the Empire. Like, that guy believes
Yeah.
I'm just at work.
Yes.
So that was
No,
very
you
much the
definitely.
perspective of it.
Yeah.
So it didn't require, um, unearthing too much of the old
Mm.
Anakin,
Hmm.
history, story. Like, although there was this story I wanted to do. Um, there's an anthology that I think Del Rey puts out called From a Certain Point of View,
Yes.
and they'd asked me once if I wanted to do a story for it, and I said, "Oh, absolutely, 100% I want to do." I'm like, "Well, what do you want to do?" It's like, I want to do, what happens on the other side of that dinner on Bespin. When
Yeah.
like Han Solo and Princess Leia walk into that room, and like, and Lando opens up, and says, "Hey, the guy you need to talk to is right here," and then he opens the door and it's Vader. Han takes a shot, blocks it, doesn't hold it and turn around because Vader doesn't do that.
They can do that.
Um,
Yeah.
and then the door closes, and I'm like, well, what happens on the other side of that door closed? Like, do they have dinner? Like,
Yeah.
does he cart them away immediately? Like, what's the other end of that? And so then I pitched. I was like, I want to do the story of the chef who's been told to cook this meal. Like, and
Yes.
for her, it was the culmination of decades of training, of like, I'm the best in my craft. I, worked up from being a sous chef on this, scullery ship to now I run the kitchen on Bestman Cloud City. It's like taking over the most luxury casino kitchen in the world, in the galaxy, right? And like I'd been watching lots of Top Chef or whatever. So, and I'm like, this is her moment. This is her time to shine. Who's my guest of honor? It's Darth fucking Vader. Are you kidding me? All right, okay. And she plans a course, and suddenly, like, she gets wind from inside the dining room. It's like nobody's eating their food. Like nobody's touching anything.
Yes.
It's Vader, and it's a bunch of these people, and they don't know what's happening. And the end of the story was like, but she continues to cook. She continues to do. It's like, this is the service of our lives. We're doing this job. And so the last thing she makes a dessert that's very humble. It's very like street level dessert. It's very like, if it's me, it's like bread pudding, right? It's like, what are the ingredients of this?
Yeah.
It's like, it's stale bread, it's eggs, it's milk, and it's sugar. Like, but if you treat it right, and it's simple food, but if you cook it well, it's the best thing you've ever tasted.
Yes.
So like that was her final meal, and the end of the story is Vader comes into the kitchen and says, like, I wanted to compliment the chef. I spent some of my youth on Coruscant, and I remember this smell from, the sort of like the bowels of the city planet where people were cooking on open fire. Like, it's street meat ultimately, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so the kind of ratatouille, remembrance of the things that he had when he was a Padawan that he always loved and hasn't had since, can't eat anymore, but the smell filters through. And he's had that moment with that chef of like, you made the thing that I loved. And so thank you for that. That's one of those like, all right, well, now we're digging underneath, is there still a man inside there? And yeah, the stories tell us that Anakin is still in there, and he's still twisted and tortured by grief and rage, but he's still in there. And like his youth was still fun and wonderful, and he saw the universe, and he righted wrongs, and all of that stuff is still in there. And to be able to like kind of pluck it out with aroma of something from his childhood, I thought was really fun.
Okay, so I totally apologize. You wrote that story, and
I wrote it. They chose to go a different way. Like, so I wrote it, and it was never in the book.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Because I think what the issue was, they're like, well, we assigned another, we have somebody else who wants to do a Bespin Kitchen story.
Yeah, okay. So I was about to say, there is a Bespin Kitchen story in there.
There is one in there.
Okay, okay. I was about to say, I was like, wait a minute, did Mark actually write that story?
No, I was a little bit peeved about that. I was like, wait, you assigned 2 Bespin Kitchen stories?
Yeah.
Why would you do that? You knew what I was doing.
Wow. Because there were some parts that, like you said, there's some parts that I was like, I don't remember that, but you're right. There was definitely a story there, because I listened. I'm an audiobook listener, and I listened to those books, and I listened to that book, and I do remember that. But wow, that is a great story. That's a thanks for that. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what, if anything, would be your dream Star Wars project to work on? If they said, Lucasfilm called you up right now and said, what do you want to do, Mark? Let's do it.
If you'd asked me this like a year ago, I would have said, like, maybe 2 years ago, I would have said, you know what? I still want to do like the Wedge Antilles story. I still want to do like the it's like Top Gun meets the like Battlestar Galactica Raptor pilots, and Viper pilots. Is like just it's futuristic. Top Gun. The creation of Red Squadron, of Rogue Squadron, like like that seems like it'd be amazing to do, and like just super fun, and just blowing up aliens, and like it'd be great. I still think that's a good show for somebody to do, but now it's like nobody needs to say that Mace Windu is dead. Like all we did, like that's the joy of science fiction. Like unless we literally saw a body. And even half the time, even if we did see a body, it doesn't mean that that's the end of the story.
Yeah, Boba Fett, right?
Boba Fett. I mean, Spock. Like, we saw that dude get shot into the moon.
Yes,
and he was dead.
That's right.
And, doesn't matter. And so, like, especially when you hear that Sam's like, I'd come back and play Mace Windu in a heartbeat.
Correct.
Now, granted, after Secret Invasion, maybe there's a little less desire on his part to become a running jumping Jedi again. But
right.
like the last Mace Windu story, like the last of any kind of story, is always super fun, and to give that character a send off that's worthy of him.
Yes.
What is that last story?
Yes.
What is the final run, the final push for Mace Windu? I think that would be fun.
Yeah, I mentioned we've been talking a lot about Mace because of the comic coming out on the show, and the one idea I thought was really neat was, if I were doing something like that, I would start kind of like Karate Kid Part 2, where it picks up right after, the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
I'd pick up like a different perspective of him falling from Palpatine's Senate building, and then seeing how he survives, seeing how he escapes, how he hides from the first from Order 66, and then there's nowhere in that timeline from then on at some point where you can't have him have one last match with the Emperor, because we don't know, like you said, we don't know his fate. We don't know what happened between 3 and 4 necessarily, except the stuff that we're getting now, but nothing's centered around these missing and surviving Jedi. So I love that aspect, and I think you're right. I think there is something open about it, and I hope maybe they get a chance to do that, and I sure hope you're the one to do it, because I think. So what do you think, a movie or a series would be what you would want to do?
I feel like, because listen, there's also the part of it where you don't want it to feel like Obi-Wan, because I don't think you want a world in which Mace Windu is hiding. Despite the realities of Order 66, I feel like we've seen Obi-Wan hide. Mm-hmm. We've seen other Jedi hide. But I kind of would want to do it a little bit like, you ever see the movie Munich?
Yeah.
Steven Spielberg, written by Tony Kushner, about the Israeli response to the sort of the murder of their athletes in the Munich Games, and who's responsible for the Emperor? Who's behind it? You don't just get to become the Emperor. Somebody had to fund you. Somebody had to, it's like the flip side of Andor, right? Who made the Emperor possible? And all of those people need to pay. And then the last person on my list is the Emperor, and then he discovers, or whatever happens, whether he wins, whether he loses, whether he finds a different thing to care about, which I think is probably the solution to that. But I want to see mean ass assassin Mace Windu just crossing people off a list that were responsible for Order 66.
Yeah, and Sam Jackson would do that.
100%. 100%.
Absolutely. Yes.
Let's go to work.
Oh my gosh, that would be fantastic. Well, Mark, I appreciate the time. This has been fantastic. I love hearing about your background and doing all these things. I'm glad you were able to dip your toe into Star Wars finally, and I hope you get there and keep going, because I'm a big fan of yours, and I hope we get more stories from.
Thanks, man.
From
I
your
appreciate
writing
it.
ability.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah, so we'll do more, of course, if you do that Mace Windu series, we'll get you back on. Yeah, we'll get you back on. I appreciate it, Mark. Thank you very much, man.
My pleasure.
Thanks everybody for watching. See you next time. May the Force be with you.